Battlefield 1943 is my absolute favorite shooter of all time. It was such a simple and fun game that on paper should not have lasted as long as it did. While most modern shooters have tons of maps, weapons, game modes, customizations, challenges and stuff to unlock in order to keep players interested, Battlefield 1943 was pretty bare bones in comparison. You had no weapons or gadgets to unlock or any way of customizing the loadouts for the different classes. You had only 3 maps and 1 single game mode. Well, technically you had 2 game modes and 4 maps if you count Coral Sea in the plane-only air superiority mode, but for most of the time there was almost no one playing that mode, so for most practical purposes you had 3 maps and 1 single game mode. But despite that, players just kept coming back and played this game from the day it was released in 2009 all the way up to when EA shut down the servers in early December of 2023. Because this game did not need all those bells and whistles that other shooters depended on. In fact, the simplicity probably worked in his favor. No need having to spend time fiddling around trying to find the perfect weapon and specialization for each class, or having to grind for hours just to get the weapon you want. Just pick one of the 3 classes and start having fun. Combine that with excellent gunplay, well-designed maps and an appealing aesthetic, and you got a real gem on your hand. The fact that players kept playing this game, a game that was most likely just meant to be a small arcade game for players to play until the next big Battlefield release, goes to show that DICE did something really special with this game. Now, if you ever played Battlefield 1943, one thing that would have become apparent pretty quickly is the game's focus on balance. Both sides had the same 3 classes, and the classes had the same weapon types between the factions that functioned exactly the same. The weapons for the different factions might have looked different, but they were in practice just different skins. The devs would even change historical aspects of the weapons for the sake of balance. Take the Rifleman for example. On the American side you have the iconic M1 Garand, which used 8-round end block clips. I love that sound. The Japanese, on the other hand, had the Type 5, also called the Type 4. The real weapon was a late prototype that, as far as I know, didn't actually see combat during the war, and it didn't use end block clips, but rather a 10-round internal magazine. But in the game, it takes the same 8-round end block clip to make it identical to the M1 Garand. Even the maps had a clear focus on balance. Take Wake Island for example. While the real Battle of Wake Island had the Americans trying to defend their base from a Japanese assault, in the game you have both sides starting at their own carrier with no one holding any part of the island. Closest to each carrier you have flags with a tank and a jeep, followed by flags with a jeep, and then one flag in the middle with tank, jeeps and a plane. Beautiful symmetry, same classes, same weapons, same vehicles, just perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Except for team balancing, that could be all over the place. 2 guys against 10. They will never defeat us. But other than that, the game was perfectly balanced. Or was it? Because there's one area where a lot of players strongly argued that the game was not balanced. One area where one faction had a clear benefit. And that is the planes. A lot of players, both on forums, on the Battlefield 1943 subreddit, and in other YouTube videos, have strongly argued that the Japanese Zero was way superior to the American Corsair. It can turn at a sharper angle and it feels smoother. I turn like a god in the Zero. The Corsair, not so much. In this game, since there's no speed difference at all between the planes, the Zero is superior in every way. Armor, if there is any difference, does not matter if you cannot get the enemy off your tail, which you cannot if your enemy is in a Zero. Also, the Zero pulls up much easier than the Corsair. In this game, the Zero is superior. End of story. But was the Zero really better than the Corsair in Battlefield 1943? Let's find out. After looking on various forums, I stumbled upon this thread where players discussed the differences between the planes, and one post linked to a podcast and a post on another forum where the developers actually addressed the differences between the Zero and the Corsair. Now, these links don't work anymore, but apparently the devs have said that the planes handle exactly the same. They are equal. Like, of course they're equal. In a game so focused on providing perfect balance, why would I suddenly make the planes different? So why do they feel different? Well, the developer had explained that they had to raise the camera position in the Zero, giving an impression that the Zero handled differently than the Corsair. But even with the developers saying right out that the planes are equal, players still didn't believe them. You can say it until you're blue in the face, it doesn't mean it's true. After 1000 kills with planes, I can tell you, they are different. Yeah, what do the developers know about how things work in a game they made? I like this comment, sorry, I just don't believe it. I have over 2000 plus air kills, which they were stat tracking to be exact, and the roll rates on the planes are different. The Corsair definitely flies heavier. I do well in both, but I've gotten 43 kills to deaths in the Zero and consistently dominate in that plane. Best in the Corsair was 34 and 10. I just can't believe this is psychological. Am I nuts? Well, let's just see for ourselves. Sometimes you just have to see it with your own eyes in order to be convinced. So in order to test this out, I went into the tutorial, since that is the only thing we can access in the game after EA shut down the servers. On the American carrier, we have one Corsair and one Japanese Zero. So even with the servers being shut down, we can still do some tests to compare the planes. The first time I really noticed players talking about there being differences between the planes was actually in July of 2023, so I was a bit late to the party. I was chatting with one of the top players in the game, and he stated that he always did much better in the Zero. But he put forth that one of the differences was actually the damage done by each plane. As he said it, sometimes with the Americans it feels like you're firing blanks. So let's test this one out first, and then we will go over to compare the movement of each plane. Let's just try to attack the Park Corsair with the Zero and vice versa, to compare the time to kill. I try to be very careful here to make sure every shot hit, and side by side we can see that, yeah, they are the same. When I sync up the video to when the first shot hit, there's no real difference to the time to kill. In order to compare the maneuverability of the two planes, we need to compare three things: the roll, the pitch, and the yaw. Now, I am no expert in flight dynamics, and I also don't know exactly how the devs programmed the physics for the planes, but I can at least tell that the rates for the roll, pitch and yaw are affected by the speed of the plane. If the speed of the plane is low, the rates for the roll, pitch and yaw are also low. So before we do any tests for these parameters, we should first see if there are any speed differences between the planes. To do this, I tried to line up two of the balloons in the tutorial to see if there are any differences between the time they hit the first balloon to the second. It was a bit difficult to line them up in the exact same way each time, but as far as I can tell, the speeds are equal. I actually found it surprisingly difficult to do the exact same movement on each plane to make sure there was no other differences, but let's try to do a barrel roll. Well, it's a bit difficult to tell, but they look about the same to me. Let's just watch it in third person and just do a single barrel roll that we put on repeat. Yeah, the rolls are exactly the same. At least there's no practical difference. For this next test, let's do a full 360 loop. Then different camera positions won't matter, since we can just see who gets back to the original position first. And... the Zero finished the loop first. Okay. I did not expect that. Maybe there was a difference in the starting angle because of the different camera positions. Let's do it again in third person, just to make sure I didn't do anything wrong. What's this? I don't believe it. Maybe there's still a difference in the starting angle or something. It can be a bit difficult to get the exact same initial conditions. Let's do it from the carriers. Then both planes start with the exact same initial conditions. That way we will surely show that the planes are exactly the same. Ah, come on. Come on! What's this? I don't believe it. What about the yaw? Let's do a 360 where we only use the rudders. And of course, the Zero finished first. They're not the same! Dice! How? Dice? Why did you say they are the same? They're not! Or are they? Am I doing something wrong? Am I nuts? Do you know what would have been very useful for testing the differences between the planes? If the servers weren't shut down. Then I could have hosted a private match with other players, and we could have had players do equal maneuvers in the planes, with some players spectating to see if they performed differently or if it was just some visual trickery. Are you listening, DICE? EA? It would have been very useful if you could just reopen the servers so I could test this one out. When I started doing research for this video, I was so sure that I was easily going to disprove that the planes handled differently, and that it in reality was just the camera positions that were different. I even knew what I was going to say in the video. I was going to say, so now we have proved that there were no differences between the planes, right? Wrong! Because there was a difference between the planes. Cue sound effects. Dun dun dun! Oh, it was going to be such a plot twist in the video. Because I actually did think that there was another, more real difference between the planes that could explain why some players performed better in the Zero. Because if you look closely, there is a very apparent difference between the two planes. Did you catch it? The Corsair have all 4 guns placed at the wings, while the Zero has 2 at the wings and 2 close to the center of the plane. If you have 2 guns at the center of the plane, it is so much easier to hit your target, because you can just aim straight at it and it would hit. You can see when using a Zero that we get 2 hit markers at the side and 2 close together in the center. This is such an obvious advantage to the Zero, which is why the developers actually did something about it to balance out the planes. Because although the Corsair had all the guns at the wings, the hitboxes of the bullets are not all at the wings. When the bullets from the Corsair hit the ground, we see the exact same pattern as the Zero. We can even do it in third person, 2 at the sides and 2 in the center for the Zero, 2 at the sides and 2... no, the Corsair didn't show any hits in the center, just at the sides. It showed the same pattern as the Zero when in first person, but not when in third person? Okay, now I'm confused. Okay, let's try out something. Let's try to do an attack run, but where we switch from first to third in the middle of the attack. Well, that is a suspicious lack of hit markers in the middle. But when I go over to when I was in first person... Yep, there's the hit markers. I don't know what to say. This is so strange. Maybe it's just a visual thing, that there isn't actually any difference, but it's just the visuals that are different. Let's test this one out by finding something really slim to shoot at. When using the Zero, I have no problem hitting these poles when aiming straight at them, both in first person and in third person. When using the Corsair in first person, there is no problem hitting these poles either, confirming that the hitboxes of the 2 bullets are actually moved to the center. But what about third person? Nope, can't hit it. I tried this so many times to make sure it was just not that I was off with the aim. It would hit in first person, but not in third person. I even tried starting a run in third person and switching to first person halfway. Didn't hit in third person, but hit no problem in first person. DICE, what's this? Like, why? So if you used to fly in third person, not only did you have less maneuverability in the Corsair, it would also be a lot harder to hit your targets. So I think we have definitely seen that the planes were not the same, at least if I haven't done anything wrong in my testing, or if these differences only apply to the tutorial. Because some players might see how I have tested the differences between the planes and say that my approach has not been very scientific. This is just me flying around in the tutorial by myself, trying to determine if the planes had any differences. But the important question is not actually whether the planes were exactly the same. The important question is, did any differences between the planes, imagined or not, have an actual impact on the battlefield? So if my approach has not been very scientific until now, then let's get scientific. So there's a user on the Battlefield 1943 subreddit by the name of cetteup, or Mr249 on Discord, and he made a website where you can look up stats of the players in the game. You just choose the Battlefield 1943 tab, write in your gamertag, and you get tons of stats. A lot more than were shown in the game itself. You get all the stats you could ever want. For instance, you get the number of deaths you had, the number of games you played, the number of kills you got, and so on. And you get tons of stats for every weapon and every vehicle in the game. Some of the variable names can be a bit cryptic, but they even made a GitHub page with an explanation for each variable. cetteup, if you're watching this, Awesome work, dude. If you want to check out your own stats, I have provided links in the description below. So let's take a look at my own stats and how I did in the Zero compared to the Corsair. For each vehicle, you get a number of stats. The time spent in that vehicle, the number of times killed by that vehicle, vehicles destroyed, the number of kills, as well as the number of road kills. Now, it would be tempting to just compare the amount of kills, but that can actually be a bit misleading as a measurement of how I performed in a plane. If I spent more time in one plane type, the number of kills is likely to be higher, even though I might have been just as efficient in each plane type. So we need a measurement that compensates for the amount of time spent in each plane. Well, we have the amount of time spent in a particular plane type. This is given in number of seconds. Divide that by 60 and you have minutes. So what we will be using as a measurement of my general efficiency in a plane is the number of kills divided by the number of minutes spent in that plane, or kills per minute. So if I performed better in the Zero, for instance, we should expect that I on average killed more players per minute than with the Corsair. I would likely win more dogfights since I can outmaneuver the Corsair, and increased maneuverability should have made it easier to line the plane up to hit moving ground targets, resulting in more kills. So when I check my stats, I get a kills per minute of 1.17 with the Corsair and 1.47 with the Zero. Well, there we have it. I actually performed better in the Zero, giving more evidence that the planes were actually different. But what about all the other players? Looking at one single player is not very scientific. Well, just how many players did that cetteup guy archive? In the end, he managed to archive the stats of 4,097,768 players. Wow. Well, technically it's not actually 4 million individual players, but rather 4 million player accounts. Some players would play on both Xbox and PS3, and I also know players that had multiple accounts on the same platform. But for simplicity, I will just refer to them as players for the rest of the video, but we should keep in mind that the actual number of individual players is a bit lower. To visualize all these players, we will use a diagram where we have the kills per minute of the Corsair on the y-axis and the kills per minute of the Zero on the x-axis. As a visual aid, I will also draw the line y equals x. This line represents all values where the kills per minute is the same for the Zero and the Corsair. All players that performed exactly the same for both planes should be someplace on this line. Players that perform better in the Corsair will be above this line, while players that perform better in the Zero will be below. I had a kills per minute of 1.17 for the Corsair and 1.47 for the Zero, so this would be my placement on this diagram. Now, what would we expect to see if we plotted all 4 million players on this diagram if there were no practical differences between the planes? We would actually not expect everyone to be placed perfectly on the y equals x line. Instead, we would expect to see a cloud of points evenly distributed around the y equals x line. Because of random effects, some players might have done slightly better in the Zero, some might have done slightly better in the Corsair, but evenly spread around this line so that the average trend shows no difference between the planes. Now, I will actually not look at all 4 million players. I want to exclude players that had little to no experience in the planes. You can imagine some players playing the game for only a few minutes, where they maybe got into a plane and just happened to get a kill within a few seconds, followed by them jumping out of the plane, never to fly again. Those players would have a very high kills per minute in that one plane type, but nothing in the other, skewing the data quite a bit. But that's not the type of player that I'm really interested in. So in order to be included in the diagram, I set a criteria that you needed to have spent at least 1 hour in both the Corsair and the Zero. That reduced 4 million players down to 766,633 players. So, what's the result? Who's correct? The developers or the players? Was there really a difference between the Zero and the Corsair that had a real impact on the battlefield? Well, look at that. Not only is the trend going below the line, the difference becomes more and more pronounced the more skilled a player was. If we increase the criteria to 10 hours in both planes, the trend becomes even more clear. And if we look at the most experienced players of all, with 100 hours spent in both planes, there is no doubt. Almost every one of the 1,661 players that fall into this category is below the line. When I look at this diagram, you know what I'm thinking? You know what question is nagging my mind? Who is this guy? This player who spent over 100 hours in both the Zero and the Corsair and still performed noticeably better in the Corsair. Well, I digged into the database and found out that this was a player called FlyNG Tiger, or perhaps Flying Tiger. This was a player who spent 768 hours in either the Zero or the Corsair. He sure was a Flying Tiger, the only highly experienced pilot who did noticeably better in the Corsair. While doing research for this video, one player I was chatting with asked me why I would spend time on a video like this. Why waste time on a game that is gone forever, he asked. Well, first because I find it so interesting. The game was so focused on providing perfect balance between the factions, but all evidence points to this not being the case for the planes. But why? Was it a bug? Perhaps it was something that was overlooked by the devs? That they tested out different values for different systems and forgot to set it back to being equal or something? We will probably never know. But besides for being an interesting topic, another reason why I wanted to spend time making this video is because I really miss this game. And by making this video, I had a reason to come back to the game, even if it was just to record footage from the tutorial. Just so I could see the visuals and hear the sounds of the game again. But the soundscape was not as I remembered. It was not the sounds of epic battle that we all love from this game, but rather the quiet sounds of the wind and wood creaking on Wake Island. I really hope they remake or remaster this game, or maybe a sequel, Battlefield 1944 and 1. And guys, if you ever remake this game, please make sure the game is actually balanced. My name is Leotzile, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.